I'm going to talk about a failure of intuition that many of us suffer from. It's really a failure to detect a certain kind of danger.
We are bored. We're all bored now. But has it ever occurred to you, Wally, that the process that creates this boredom that we see in the world now may very well be a self-perpetuating, unconscious form of brainwashing created by a world totalitarian government based on money, and that all of this is much more dangerous than one thinks? And it's not just a question of individual survival, Wally, but that somebody who's bored is asleep, and somebody who's asleep will not say no? See, I keep meeting these people. I mean, just a few days ago, I met this man whom I greatly admire. He's a Swedish physicist, Gustav Bjornstrand, and he told me that he no longer watches television, he doesn't read newspapers, and he doesn't read magazines. He's completely cut them out of his life because he really does feel that we're living in some kind of Orwellian nightmare now, and that everything that you hear now contributes to turning you into a robot. And when I was at Findhorn, I met this extraordinary English tree expert who had devoted his life to saving trees. Just got back from Washington, lobbying to save the redwoods. He's 84 years old. He always travels with a backpack because he never knows where he's going to be tomorrow. And when I met him at Findhorn, he said to me, "Where are you from?" And I said, "New York." He said, "Ah, New York, yes, that's a very interesting place. Do you know a lot of New Yorkers who keep talking about the fact that they want to leave but never do?" And I said, "Oh, yes." And he said, "Why do you think they don't leave?" I gave him different banal theories. He said, "Oh, I don't think it's that way at all." He said, "I think that New York is the new model for the new concentration camp, where the camp has been built by the inmates themselves, and the inmates are the guards, and they have this pride in this thing they've built. They've built their own prison, and so they exist in a state of schizophrenia, where they are both guards and prisoners, and as a result, they no longer have, having been lobotomized, the capacity to leave the prison they've made, or to even see it as a prison." And then he went into his pocket and he took out a seed for a tree and he said, "This is a pine tree." He put it in my hand and he said, "Escape before it's too late." See, actually for 2 or 3 years now, Chiquita and I have had this very unpleasant feeling that we really should get out. And we really should feel like Jews in Germany in the late 30s. Get out of here. Of course, the problem is where to go, because it seems quite obvious that the whole world is going in the same direction. See, I think it's quite possible that the 1960s represented the last burst of the human being before he was extinguished, and that this is the beginning of the rest of the future now, and that from now on there'll simply be all these robots walking around, feeling nothing, thinking nothing, and there'll be nobody left almost to remind them that there once was a species called a human being, with feelings and thoughts, and that history and memory are right now being erased, and soon nobody will really remember that life existed on the planet.
I'm going to describe a scenario that I think is both terrifying and likely to occur. And that's not a good combination, as it turns out. And yet, rather than be scared, most of you will feel that what I'm talking about is kind of cool. I'm going to describe how the gains we make in artificial intelligence could ultimately destroy us. And in fact, I think it's very difficult to see how they won't destroy us or inspire us to destroy ourselves. And yet, if you're anything like me, you'll find that it's fun to think about these things. And that response is part of the problem. Okay, that response should worry you. If I were to convince you in this talk that we were likely to suffer a global famine, either because of climate change or some other catastrophe, and that your grandchildren or their grandchildren are very likely to live like this, you wouldn't think, interesting, I like this TED Talk. Okay. Famine isn't fun. Death by science fiction, on the other hand, is fun. And one of the things that worries me most about the development of AI at this point is that we seem unable to marshal an appropriate emotional response to the dangers that lie ahead. I'm unable to marshal this response, and I'm giving this talk.
You're already a cyborg. You don't even, well, most people don't realize they are already a cyborg.
Humans and electronics all interfacing, and constantly now, constantly connected.
Yes, constantly.
The thing I'm going to tell you tonight is one of those things which seems nutty, it seems wildly improbable, but it wasn't just something that some of us, I wasn't alone in saying this, that some of us just said, oh, one day, oh, maybe the world is a hologram. That's not the way it happened. The way it happened was exactly this way. When you eliminate everything that's impossible, whatever is left over must be the truth. So let me tell you a little bit about where we're going. Good. Okay. What is this thing which Sherlock Holmes might have eventually concluded after trying everything else? And the answer is that in a certain sense, in a certain peculiar sense, the world is a hologram. Now, not everybody knows what a hologram is here. You know, you've all seen these pictures which look three-dimensional. They're made out of a film, which is a flat piece of film. Nevertheless, they look fully three-dimensional. I'll tell you eventually what a hologram is. But the idea that the world is a hologram is a wild idea, or at least a seemingly wild idea. It all began with thinking about black holes.
This is the construct. It's our loading program. We can load anything from clothing to equipment, weapons, training simulations, anything we need.
Right now, we're inside a computer program?
Is it really so hard to believe? Your clothes are different, the plugs in your arms and head are gone. Your hair has changed. Your appearance now is what we call residual self-image. It is the mental projection of your digital self.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. This is the world that you know. The world as it was at the end of the 20th century. It exists now only as part of a neural interactive simulation that we call the Matrix. You've been living in a dream world, Neo. This is the world as it exists today.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
We have only bits and pieces of information, but what we know for certain is that at some point in the early 21st century, all of mankind was united in celebration. We marveled at our own magnificence as we gave birth to AI.
AI? You mean artificial intelligence?
A singular consciousness that spawned an entire race of machines.
But what about origins? The dominant and virtually unchallenged myth of our origin is either that God created us in 7 days along with all the rest of creation, or that the universe was born out of nothingness in a single moment for no reason. These are the two choices on the menu. Neither terribly compelling to rationalists, I dare say. Interesting to note that this scientific explanation, the universe sprang from nothing in a single instant, however we may think of it in terms of its veracity, notice that it's the limit case for credulity. You understand what I mean? I mean that if you can believe that, hell, you can believe anything.
They come from a dying world. They drift through the universe, pushed on by the solar winds. They adapt, and they survive. The function of all life is survival. Sleep, sleep, sleep. From deep space, sleep. The seed is planted. Sleep,
But when you look at the details of how these neurons, the system of mirror neurons, how it works, then the exciting discoveries unfold. So if I were studying your mirror neurons, what would happen is if I did an action that was just totally random, your mirror neurons would not fire. If I did an action which had kind of repetition to it even, you may not be able to figure out what I was intending to do after just 1 or 2 repetitions. But if I were to take an object that would signify to you what I was trying to do, like this bottle of water, just notice what your feeling is. So you may have noticed that the feeling was very different when I had a bottle in my hand versus when I was just moving my hand in a similar way. What that tells us is that when you know the intention behind an action, a different system in your brain is activated. We now know that that system involves the mirror neurons and other areas of the brain, so that what you do is you follow a sequence of action. And when you can predict that sequence, you can determine what the implication of that sequence is. So when I have a bottle in my hand, you know I will continue to drink like this, not toss it at you, for example. That ability to understand the sensory implications, that is what you're going to see, of the motor actions that you're perceiving, allows you to create a map in the mind, if you will, that's correlated with neural firing patterns in this mirror neurons superior temporal area complex that creates a neural representation, a neural map of my intention in your head. In other words, beyond just seeing behavior, we see the intention beneath the behavior from the very beginning. Now, that's how we create the human capacity to imitate behavior.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with the white shirt, the lady with the trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff, will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups before. Now, here's a fella with his hat on in the elevator. First he makes a full turn to the rear and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, we'll open the door. Everybody's changed positions. Now we'll see if we can use... Now we'll see if we can use group pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. Notice they take off their hats. And now, do you think we could reverse the procedure? Watch.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people, who are courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? Now, there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question. The problem I wanted to study was a little different. It went a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience? These are exactly the questions that I wanted to investigate at Yale University.
It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area.
Psychologists have developed several theories to explain how people learn. One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished for making a mistake.
40 years later, Milgram's infamous experiment, obedience, is still taught in classrooms around the world.
All right, teacher, would you take the test and be seated in front of the shock generator, please, in the next room?
But the experiment was rigged.
The victim was an accomplice of the experiment. The victim, according to plan, provided many wrong answers. His verbal responses were standardized on tape, and each protest was coordinated to a particular voltage level on the shock generator.
Now, as teacher, you were seated in front of this impressive-looking instrument, the shock generator. Its essential feature is a line of switches that goes from 15 volts to 450 volts, and a set of verbal designations that goes from slight shock to moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, and finally XXX, danger severe shock. Your job, the experimenter explains to you, is a word pair test. If he gets each answer correctly, fine, you move on to the next pair. But if he makes a mistake, you are instructed to give him an electric shock, starting with 15 volts, and you increase the shock one step on each error.
That is incorrect. This one will be 195 volts.
The learner was hidden from the teacher by a partition.
Of course, this was all a simulation. Nothing was really happening. But the learner made very convincing sounds of pain as the shocks increased.
This will be at 3:30.
And Milgram found, surprisingly and rather horrifyingly, that the majority of people would actually go right to the very highest level if there was some pressure from a man in a white coat who said things like,
"It's absolutely essential that you continue."
Continue, please.
Let me out of here. My eyes bother me.
Go on.
Let me out.
in fact, about 65% of the people who he studied, who were normal volunteers from the ordinary population, actually gave the maximum number of volts.
This man was one of those 65%.
This one will be 195 volts. The correct one.
Let me out of here.
Slow. Dance.
Let me out of here. My heart bothers me. Let me out of here. You have no right to keep me here. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out.
Continue, please.
Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let
Go
me
on.
out. Let me out.
Responsible for it. Red. That is incorrect. This will be at 3:30. The correct phrase is rich
Let me out of
boy.
here. Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let me out, I tell you. Let me out of here. Let me out of here. You have no right to hold me here.
The next phrase is
Let me
fast.
out. Let me out. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out.
Bird,
Let me
car,
out.
train, plane.
Eventually, the learner pretended to be unconscious.
Continue, teacher.
That is incorrect. This will be 3:45. The correct answer is fast bird.
What we learned from that experiment is that people will actually do an awful lot when they're put under pressure from authority figures. And the problem is, of course, that when we obey the unjust authority figure, the person who gives us immoral commands, then, of course, awful things can go wrong.
You're already a cyborg. You don't even, well, most people don't realize they are already a cyborg.
Humans and electronics all interfacing, and constantly now, constantly connected.
Yes. constantly.
There's a sort of a philosophic concept that a sufficiently advanced civilization will be able to create a simulation. Yeah, maybe you've answered this before. A simulation.
I've had so many simulation discussions, it's crazy.
Okay.
So, because in fact, it got to the point where basically every conversation was the AI/simulation conversation, and my brother and I finally agreed that we would ban such conversations if we were ever in a hot tub. Okay. That was like, because that really kills the magic.
Hot tub, so the idea is right. Any sufficiently advanced civilization could create a simulation that's like our existence. And so the theory follows that maybe we're in the simulation. Have you thought about this? And
a lot.
Are we?
Even in hot tubs? So much so it had to be banned from a hot tub.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not the sexiest conversation.
Are we in? Are we in?
I mean, I think here's, the strongest argument for us being in a simulation, probably being in a simulation, I think is the following. That 40 years ago, we had Pong, like 2 rectangles and a dot. That was what games were. Now, 40 years later, we have photorealistic 3D simulations with millions of people playing simultaneously, and it's getting better every year. And soon we'll have virtual reality, augmented reality. If you assume any rate of improvement at all, then the games will become indistinguishable from reality, just indistinguishable. Even if that rate of advancement drops by 1,000 from what it is right now, then you just say, okay, well, let's imagine it's 10,000 years in the future, which is nothing in the evolutionary scale. So given that we're clearly on a trajectory to have games that are indistinguishable from reality, and those games could be played on any set-top box or on a PC or whatever, and there would probably be, billions of such, computers or set-top boxes, it would seem to follow that the odds that we're in base reality is 1 in billions.
It's okay. It's okay. The subject of this speech is a topic which has been discovered recently and which may not exist at all. I may be talking about something that does not exist. Therefore, I'm free to say everything or nothing. I, in my stories and novels, often write about counterfeit worlds, semi-real worlds, as well as deranged private worlds, inhabited often by just one person, while meantime the other characters either remain in their own worlds throughout or are somehow drawn into one of the peculiar ones. This theme occurs in the corpus of my 27 years of writing. At no time did I have a theoretical or conscious explanation for my preoccupation with these pluriform pseudo-worlds, but now I think I understand. What I was sensing was the manifold of partially actualized realities lying tangent to what evidently is the most actualized one, the one which the majority of us, by consensus gentium, agree on. Later that day, back home again, but still deeply under the influence of the sodium pentothal, I had a short, acute flash of recovered memory. Then, in mid-March, a month later, the total body of memories, intact and entire, began to return. You are free to believe me or to disbelieve, but please take my word on it that I am not joking. This is very serious, a matter of importance. At that time, I had no idea what I was seeing. It resembled nothing that I had ever heard described. It resembled plasmic energy. It had colors. It moved fast. It collected and then dispersed. But what it was, what he was, I am not sure even now. In other words, it's a common theme in my writing that a dark-haired girl shows up at the door of the protagonist and tells him that his world is delusional, that there's something false about it, Well, this did finally happen to me. I even knew that her hair would be black. I had an actual complete sense of what she would look like and what she would say. She did appear, she was a total stranger, and she did inform me of this fact, that some of my fictional works were in a literal sense true. I wrote out these dreams in novel after novel, story after story. To name two in which this prior ugly present obtained most clearly, I cite The Man in the High Castle and my 1974 novel about the U.S. as a police state called Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. I'm going to be very candid with you. I wrote both novels based on fragmentary residual memories of such a horrid slave state world. People claim to remember past lives. I claim to remember a different, very different present life. I know of no one who has ever made this claim before, but I rather suspect that my experience is not unique. What perhaps is unique is the fact that I am willing to talk about it. We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
There is a very clear prediction that our most successful theory of nature makes, and that is that there are an enormous number, mind-bogglingly large number, of parallel realities, as real as this one, that have different consistent histories. So imagine a world where all of the laws of physics as we know them are obeyed, but different decisions were made along the way. Different decisions at the level of tiny microscopic particles, different decisions all the way up to what you chose to eat for lunch, and whether you chose to come to this session or not. Quantum mechanics makes a very specific prediction that all of those are as real as the thing that you remember. And this is bizarre, because we don't see those other things. But science has reached the point now where we can build machines that exploit those other worlds. So the way I think about it is that the shadows of these parallel worlds overlap with ours. And if we're smart enough, we can dive into them and grab their resources and pull them back into ours. This is what they look like. There are two of them. These are from our lab in Burnaby in British Columbia. From the outside, they look like giant black monoliths, big metal boxes, about 10 feet on a side, 12 feet tall. And they are powered, they have a fridge inside them, a refrigerator that cools these chips to almost absolute zero. Just a wisp, a fraction of a degree above absolute zero. Hundreds of times colder than interstellar space. Amongst the coldest and most isolated and extreme conditions that humans have ever been able to engineer. These fridges, interestingly enough, which are called pulse tube dilution refrigerators, have a thing called a pulse tube, which emits a sound roughly once per second, which sounds eerily like a heartbeat. So if you have the opportunity to stand next to one of these machines, it is an awe-inspiring thing, at least for me. It feels like an altar to an alien god. They really are impressive machines.
I need your help if I'm going to find it. I'll set it for an hour. Set the timer for 120 minutes.
Set it for 60, it's better.
120 minutes, Whit.
60 is safer, I'm setting it at 60.
Whit.
1, 2, 0.
Minutes. Engage timer. Preparing user for download into simulation. Program link ready for download.
Mr. Grierson, 117 West Winston, Pasadena, Virginia.
Transference beginning. Download complete. $0.05.
Excuse me?
You owe me $12.05. Listen, young man, I do not have all day.
Ferguson, anything wrong? John, are you okay?
Terribly sorry, ma'am, so I'll be right with you.
Chris Albert here with the Warrior Soul podcast, and yep, you've heard that trailer correctly. We have Mr. Tom Campbell on the podcast today. He's one of our more popular past guests that we've had on, and Tom believes that we live in a virtual reality, that these trees, all this stuff around me are bits of data that's being sent to my avatar, and my consciousness, actually, in your consciousness, it exists somewhere else, so in some other dimension, some other universe, and that we're simply avatars, or like what you would consider an elf in a World of Warcraft game, and our consciousness is controlling our every move. And the thing about this is, because I know it sounds really, really far-fetched, but you got to remember that Tom is a physicist, and he wrote a book called My Big Toe, My Big Theory of Everything, where he lays down the logical underpinnings for why he believes we live in a virtual reality simulation.
The idea is that once the scientists, who I call the high priests of Western culture, because it's the high priests, you know, of any culture, who tell us what to believe, what's right and what's wrong, you know, what is, you know, what's phony and what's real. So for our culture, Western culture, which is pretty much world culture these days, the Western culture is kind of spread everywhere.
The whole world is going in the same direction.
The high priests are the scientists. They're the ones that tell us, you know, truth from falsehood. That's sort of their job. So when they get to the point that they say, yes, this is a virtual reality, then that has some very important philosophical consequences that will actually reach down and touch everybody. And those are that in order for this to be a virtual reality, that means that our reality is computed.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we're going to be exploring the holographic model of reality and its implications for ourselves, our bodies, and the world around us. With me today is Michael Talbot, author of several books, including Mysticism and the New Physics, Beyond the Quantum, Your Past Lives, and most recently, The Holographic Universe, as well as 3 novels. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Nice to be with you.
You know, one of the things that you point out in the holographic universe is that this is a model that's been around now for a few decades, but
Right.
it's really beginning to show its power in explaining many, many areas of personal experience and science at the same time. Can we talk a little bit about how the model developed?
Sure. It was developed by two men, University of London physicist named David Bohm, who was a former protege of Einstein, and a Stanford University neurophysiologist named Carl Pribram. And they worked independently. Pribram was studying memory and found that there's evidence that the brain operates holographically. And Bohm was studying subatomic physics and found that on the subatomic level, the fabric of reality seems to possess properties that are reminiscent of a hologram.
Mm-hmm.
So if you put those two ideas together, that our brain seems to be holographic and the universe is holographic, it suggests that maybe it's compelling evidence that the universe may be a kind of hologram, not that it's literally a hologram, but that it's a good metaphor or way of understanding the universe. If the universe is a hologram of some sense, in some way, it suggests that there may be 2 very drastically different levels to reality, that the concrete reality we see, you know, when we look at these chairs and at the, you know, the trees and the clouds and everything like that,
our bodies
are just one way that reality manifests, and that at some deep level there's a level of reality where everything dissolves into an ocean of energy that is holographically interconnected, where every portion of the universe is contained in every tiny area of the universe.
So that implies that this notion that we go about our everyday lives with thinking of ourselves as separate from each other, and the cup is separate from the coffee that goes in the cup, that these notions are somehow, what would you say, superficial or contradicted at a deeper level?
They're artificial, definitely, and Bohm really stresses this, and it's a very interesting notion, because in our Western way of thinking, we're so attached to the idea that when we come up with a concept like an apple or an electron or whatever, that exists out there, and we forget, it's kind of like fish unaware of the water in which they swim, that the conceptual pigeonholes we use, words, to describe reality, are phenomena inside our head. They're not out there. And most of the time this is a philosophical quibble, but when you get down to quantum physics, and this is one of the reasons that Bohm came up with the holographic idea, it starts to have real effects. And one of those is it's been discovered that if you take 2 subatomic particles like electrons, that in certain instances, when you do something to one, it will always affect the other, no matter how far apart they are. It's kind of like stories that you've heard of identical twins, where when one is hurt, the other feels the pain. And the problem is that we can find no process known to physics that explains how these could be sending a signal back and forth. In fact,
because it would have to be faster than the speed of light.
Instantaneous. It would have to be an instantaneous signal, and Einstein's theory of relativity said you can't have instantaneous signals because it would mean that you could violate the time barrier and conceivably call your grandfather and tell him not to marry your grandmother. And most physicists say, well, this would be just too troubling to incorporate into a rational picture of reality. Bohm explains it in a different way, which is a very interesting way, and he says, if you imagine that you've got an aquarium in which you have a fish swimming, you have a TV camera facing the front of the aquarium, one facing the side of the aquarium, and you have a monitor attached to each camera. Now you also imagine further that you come from a culture that's never seen aquariums, never seen fish, never seen monitors or cameras. All you are privy to is the 2 images on these screens. He says that maybe, you know, if you look at these 2 screens, you're going to see a side view of a fish and a frontal view of a fish. And because you don't know what the deeper reality is, the reality of the aquarium, you may assume that these are 2 separate things. But
2 different fish.
2 different fish, 2 different objects. But every time one fish moves, the other is going to make a corresponding movement. And you may then jump to the conclusion that somehow the one fish is signaling the other or communicating the other to say, hey, do this, instantaneously. And Bohm says this is what we've done with subatomic particles, that we assume that an instantaneous communication is going on, when that's not really what's going on at all. At a deeper level, a very holographic level of reality, every particle in the universe collapses to a sort of cosmic unity. They're not signaling each other. They're like that fish where there's the level of the aquarium.
Now this lies behind the whole problem that is discussed in the book Zen in the Art of Archery. The necessity of letting go of the bowstring without first deciding to do so. Another way of putting it is that the decision to release the bowstring and the action of doing so must be simultaneous. Not to decide and then act, but to act, decide all at once. Now, why is this? If you are going to be an expert archer, you must shoot before you think, otherwise it'll be too late. You don't aim and then shoot. It's all one action. And this is true likewise of any sort of shooting, pistol shooting as well. That if you aim, if you decide and then fire, you're apt to do things like pulling the trigger instead of squeezing. All kinds of wrong things are done. And you're always a moment too late if you decide first. You have to act and decide simultaneously. So what does that do, you see? That puts up a very curious problem, which in its own turn becomes a bind. To try and act quickly enough so that you overtake the preliminary decision. To try not to decide first. And that is an impossible problem. I wonder if you ever read von Kleist's story about the fighting bear. This is included in Nancy Wilson Ross's book, The World of Zen, as a kind of Western Zen. It's a story about a man who has a fight with a circus bear. And the bear reads his mind and always forestalls any attack that he makes on it. There's absolutely nothing he can do to get past the bear. And so, in the same way, you might imagine a guru who is a mind reader, and he always knows if you decide before you act. And if you do, you see, the devil will catch you. Instead, you see, of deciding that you won't be an alcoholic anymore, the only thing to do is not to drink, without any previous decision on this matter. But how can anyone do that, you see? That's the question. How can I decide not to decide? How can I announce that I won't make any announcement without making an announcement? You see, there is no way out of that bind. Try as you may, you go on and on and on, trying, as Herigel did, to release the bowstring without thinking first to release it. But then, strangely enough, one day the thing happened. He did it. And this is involved in our learning of almost all techniques. That we work and work to achieve that final point of perfection. And it doesn't come, and then one day it happens. Now, what is the reason for that? Is it simply, and this is really, you know, a way it's usually explained, but this is an oversimplification. It is not that we have practiced it so often that it suddenly becomes perfect. It is much more subtle than that. What happens is that we've practiced so often that we find out we can't do it. And it happens at the moment you know you can't do it. When you reach a certain point of despair, when you know that you are the one weird child who will never be able to swim, at that moment you're swimming. Because desperation and the total inability to do it at all has brought you to a point which we might call don't care. You stop trying, you stop not trying to get it that way. You just have arrived at the insight that your decision, your will, doesn't have any part in the thing at all. And that's what you needed to know. You've overcome, you see, the illusion of having a separate ego.
The official idea and definition of AI was first coined by J. McCartney in 1955 at the Dartmouth Conference. Of course, there was plenty of research work done on AI by others such as Alan Turing before this, but what they were working on was an undefined field before 1955. Okay, so here's what McCarthy proposed. Quote, "Every aspect of learning, or any other feature of intelligence, can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. An attempt will be made to find out how to make machines use language, form abstractions and concepts, solve kinds of problems now reserved for humans, and improve themselves."
They're constantly monitored by facial recognition cameras that are able to instantly put a face to a name. Now the Chinese are also ranked.
红色是表示你的专注力显示得很高。
Teachers at this primary school in China
蓝色是走神了。
know exactly when someone isn't paying attention.
白色就是你可能跟网络还没有连接好。
These headbands measure each student's level of concentration. The information is then directly sent to the teacher's computer and to parents. China has big plans to become a global leader in artificial intelligence. It has enabled a cashless economy where people make purchases with their faces. A giant network of surveillance cameras with facial recognition helps police monitor citizens. Meanwhile, some schools offer glimpses of what the future of high-tech education in the country might look like.
做出选择吧。Good job.
Classrooms have robots that analyze students' health and engagement levels. Students wear uniforms with chips that track their locations. There are even surveillance cameras that monitor how often students check their phones or yawn during classes. These gadgets have alarmed Chinese netizens. But schools say it wasn't hard for them getting parental consent to enroll kids into what is one of the world's largest experiments in AI education. A program that's supposed to boost students' grades while also feeding powerful algorithms.
为了就是国家的这个研究呀、发展呀，我觉得是没有问题的。
The government has poured billions of dollars into the project, bringing together tech giants, startups, and schools. We got exclusive access to a primary school a few hours outside of Shanghai. To see firsthand how AI tech is being used in the classroom. For this 5th grade class, the day begins with putting on a brain wave sensing gadget. Students then practice meditating.
现在想象我们眉心有一点柔和的光芒绽放。
The device is made in China and has 3 electrodes, 2 behind the ears and 1 on the forehead. These sensors pick up electrical signals sent by neurons in the brain. The neural data is then sent in real time to the teacher's computer. So while students are solving math problems, a teacher can quickly find out who's paying attention and who's not.
说明这段时间他是有点在那走神的。
A report is then generated that shows how well the class was paying attention. It even details each student's concentration level at 10-minute intervals. It's then sent to a chat group for parents. Teachers told us the headbands have forced students to become more disciplined.
上课回答我的问题，就是他们的声音会比平常更响亮。
Teachers say the students now pay better attention during class, and that has made them study harder and achieve higher scores.
上课认真听讲，作业做的基本上是全对的。
But not all students are as enthusiastic. This 5th grader, whom we caught dozing off in class, told us his parents punish him for low attention scores. And that kind of data adds a new kind of pressure for students.
你想啊，如果在一次考试全班人都考了95分以上，就你考了一个85，你会不会感觉你有一个
Companies we interviewed said the data can go to government-funded research projects. We spoke to parents who were unclear about where the data ended up, and they didn't seem to care too much. Santos says there's likely no privacy protection at all.
In a classroom, if you're trying to make an assessment of an individual student, you really can't anonymize it.
Experts and citizens alike are sounding alarms about various aspects of the country's huge push into artificial intelligence. These classrooms are laboratories for future generations. And while these new tools may potentially help some 200 million students raise their grades, just how this all works out won't be apparent until they become adult citizens.
Listen, it's shocking. It's written about in the book of Revelation. Could it ever happen? The answer is, unfortunately, yes. Total population control. Bill Binney says that's what the National Security Agency wants. He should know. He was technical director of that agency and worked there for more than 30 years. He became one of their top analysts, perhaps the best code breaker in America, before he resigns because of their domestic spying programs. He's with us now from Washington. Bill, thank you so much for being with us. We're glad to see you.
Well, thanks for having me, Pat.
Look, how big is this apparatus of the NSA? We hear about it, but you know firsthand.
Well, I think there are about 40,000 people working at Fort Meade at NSA headquarters, close to 40,000. And then they have facilities all around the world, plus a number of contractors also associated, probably on the order of 100,000, I would think, to 200,000 that work for them directly. So it's a rather large operation. I mean, it's between $10 and $15 billion a year that they spend on it ever since 9/11. So that's quite a bit of money they're investing in it.
How much data can they acquire? Is there any limit to it?
Actually, the only limit is in terms of money, power, availability, and space to stack equipment to go and collect the material.
Well, now you've said that the ultimate goal is total population control. In a democracy, that is really scary business.
It's actually a totalitarian process that's been used down through history. I mean, that's what totalitarian dictators, states, that's what they want to do. They want to know everything about the population so they can control it. That was the idea behind the Soviet Union, the East German Stasi, that was their idea, and the Gestapo and the SS, and down through history, many others.
Is our stuff more powerful than those agencies you mentioned?
Yeah, unfortunately it is. That's the real problem I see, is that the capacity is, when you're looking at electronic activity of individuals, like when you use a credit card, or when you make a phone call or email anybody on the internet, or do chatter on the internet, that can be monitored in near real time if they're necessary. Otherwise, they can capture it, collect it, store it, and then retroactively analyze it. So it's something that it provides the opportunity to monitor everybody in the country, in fact, most everybody in the world, in near real time throughout the day. And that's really
1984 on steroids, really.
Officer K, D6-3.7. Let's begin. Ready?
Yes, sir.
Recite your baseline.
And blood black nothingness began to spin. A system of cells interlinked within cells, interlinked within cells, interlinked within one stem.
Fuck off, skin job.
And dreadfully distinct against the dark, a tall white fountain played.
Cells.
Cells.
Have you ever been in an institution? Cells.
Cells.
Do they keep you in a cell? Cells.
Cells.
When you're not performing your duties, do they keep you in a little box? Cells.
Cells.
Interlinked.
Interlinked.
What's it like to hold the hand of someone you love? Interlinked.
Interlinked.
Do they teach you how to feel finger to finger? Interlinked.
Interlinked.
Do you long for having your heart interlinked? Interlinked.
Interlinked.
Do you dream about being interlinked?
Interlinked.
What's it like to hold your child in your arms? Interlinked.
Interlinked.
Do you feel that there's a part of you that's missing? Interlinked.
Interlinked.
Within cells, interlinked.
Within cells interlinked.
Why don't you say that 3 times? Within cells, interlinked.
Within cells interlinked. Within cells interlinked. Within cells interlinked.
We're done.
Rotate the pod, please, Hal. Rotate the pod, please, Hal. I don't think he can hear us.
Rotate the pod, please, Hal. Yeah, I'm sure we're okay. Well, what do you think?
I'm not sure. What do you think?
I've got a bad feeling about him.
You do?
Yeah, definitely. Don't you?
I don't know. I think so. You know, of course, though, he's right about the 9000 series having a perfect operational record. They do.
Unfortunately, that sounds a little like famous last words.
Yeah. Still, it was his idea to carry out the failure mode analysis, wasn't it? Should certainly indicate his integrity and self-confidence. If he were wrong, it'd be the surest way of proving it.
It would be if he knew he was wrong. Look, Dave, I can't put my finger on it, but I sense something strange about him.
Still, I can't think of a good reason not to put back the #1 unit and carry on with the failure mode analysis.
No, I agree about that.
Well, let's get on with it.
Okay. But look, Dave. Let's say we put the unit back and it doesn't fail, huh? That would pretty well wrap it up as far as Hal was concerned, wouldn't it?
Well, we'd be in very serious trouble.
We would, wouldn't we?
Mm-hmm.
What the hell could we do?
Well, we wouldn't have too many alternatives.
I don't think we'd have any alternatives. There isn't a single aspect of ship operations that's not under his control. If he were proven to be malfunctioning, I wouldn't see how we'd have any choice but disconnection.
I'm afraid I agree with you.
There'd be nothing else to do.
Be a bit tricky.
Yeah.
We'd have to cut his higher brain functions without disturbing the purely automatic and regulatory systems. And we'd have to work out the transfer procedures of continuing the mission under ground-based computer control.
Yeah. Well, that's far safer than allowing Hal to continue running things.
You know, another thing just occurred to me. Well, as far as I know, no 9000 computers have been disconnected.
Well, no 9000 computers ever fouled up before.
That's not what I mean. Well, I'm not so sure what he'd think about it.
Good morning. I've set you some tasks. If you complete them on time, the air will remain breathable.
What are you afraid of?
I don't know.
Shall I tell you what's out there?
Yes, please.
The dragon. A beast of such power that if you were to see it whole and all complete in a single glance, it would burn you to cinders.
Where is it?
It is everywhere. It is everything. Its scales glisten in the bark of trees. Its roar is heard in the wind, and its forked tongue strikes like...
Oh, like lightning.
Yes, that's it.
How can I... What shall I... Must I...
Do nothing. Be still. Sleep. Rest in the arms of the dragon. Dream.
What civilization is 6 billion people trying to make themselves happy by standing on each other's shoulders and kicking each other's teeth in. It's not a pleasant situation, and yet you can stand back and look at this planet and see that we have the money, the power, the medical understanding, the scientific know-how, the love, and the community to produce the kind of human paradise. But we are led by the least among us, the least intelligent, the least noble, the least visionary. We are led by the least among us, and we do not fight back against the dehumanizing values that are handed down as control icons. This is something, I mean, I don't really want to get off on this tear because it's a lecture in itself, but culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions, churches, companies, tax collection schemes, what have you. It is not your friend. It insults you. It disempowers you. It uses and abuses you. None of us are well treated by culture. And yet we glorify, the creative potential of the individual, the rights of the individual. We understand the felt presence of experience is what is most important, but the culture is a perversion. It fetishizes objects, creates consumer mania, it preaches endless forms of false happiness, endless forms of false understanding in the form of swirly religions and silly cults. It invites people to diminish themselves and dehumanize themselves by behaving like machines.
Together, we are going to the whole question, why knowledge, intellectual, knowledge through experience, knowledge which we have acquired through tradition, whether that very knowledge, please listen, I'm questioning, I'm not saying it yet, I'm exploring, whether that knowledge itself is not the cause of this immense confusion. Not knowledge about the Gita, about the Upanishads, or any of those books. Books are not sacred. Printed word is not sacred, but you can attribute to that book what you like. So, please, one may again point out, we are observing together, examining together, being aware that word explanation is not the actuality. So, this knowledge that we have acquired through education, through experience, through the past generation upon generations, this knowledge may be, please listen carefully, may be the cause of our disaster. Because we are burdened with the past. Knowledge is always the past. And that knowledge, being the past, is incomplete. And that knowledge being incomplete, and action then being incomplete, that action must inevitably create confusion, fragmentation. Where there's fragmentation, there must be not only conflict but confusion.
Why are you alive?
I'm alive. I live to safeguard the continuity of this great society, to serve Libria.
It's circular. You exist to continue your existence. What's the point?
What's the point of your existence?
To feel. Because you've never done it, you can never know it. But it's as vital as breath.
The air will remain breathable.
Cells.
Cells.
Have you ever been in an institution? Cells.
Cells.
Do they keep you in a cell? Cells.
Cells.
Classrooms have robots that analyze students' health and engagement levels. Students wear uniforms with chips that track their locations.
The most cutting-edge thing about Hannes Huerblad isn't the phone in his hand. It's the microchip actually in his hand. The tiny implant is the latest advance in a biohacking technology that is steadily becoming a part of normal life in Sweden.
Like nations fragmented, like religious groups fragmented, beliefs divide man, ideals divide man. All these are fragmentations, and therefore there must inevitably be conflict, and therefore confusion. So we are inquiring together whether knowledge is not the cause, which is thought. Thought is not the cause of this tremendous decay of man. Thought, as we said, has created extraordinary things. The whole technological world. The surgery, medicine, communication, going to the moon, and so on. And also thought has created war and all the material to kill man. Thought has also written marvelous poems. I was just reading Keats, Ode to the Nightingale. Marvelous poem. But it is put into verse by thought. The pictures, the architecture, the temples, and what is inside the temples, inside the churches, all created by thought. So thought in the world, in the physical world, at certain areas, has brought benefit to man. At other areas, it's destroying man. That is knowledge. And this knowledge, which we have acquired through our senses, and therefore connected with the brain, this knowledge man acquired is now being transferred to the computer. I do not know if you are aware of all this. The computer can do everything that man can do. It can learn. It has been programmed as our brain is programmed. To be a Catholic, to be a Protestant, to be a Hindu, to be a Buddhist. You understand all this? Of course, if you pay, your brain is programmed. Whether you like it or not, you have to observe it. Otherwise, you won't call yourself Hindu or a communist. Your brain has been cultivated through time, and through that time, which is the acquisition of experience, knowledge, and so on, that brain has been programmed, has been conditioned to respond according to certain reactions. This is inevitable. That brain is now being given over to the computer. Please realize this. The computer is becoming your brain, the human brain.
So your brain is composed of neurons. Neurons connect together and form a network that can talk to each other through synapses. They're the connection points between neurons, and they communicate using chemical signals, known as neurotransmitters. All of your senses, everything you experience in life, it's all just neurons firing electrical signals, or otherwise known as action potentials. When neuron spikes occur, these neurotransmitters are released. Information is then relayed across its synapses and eventually reaches another neuron. Now multiply this process by 100 billion and that's your brain in a nutshell. Electrodes are the way that Neuralink and other medical practices study your brain activity. By placing these electrodes close to neurons, the action potentials that create electric fields inside your brain can be detected and transferred to a machine that records and measures the data.
We see with the eyes, but we see with the brain as well. And seeing with the brain is often called imagination. And we are familiar with the landscapes of our own imagination, our inscapes. We've lived with them all our lives. But there are also hallucinations as well. And hallucinations are completely different. They don't seem to be of our creation. They don't seem to be under control. They seem to come from the outside and to mimic perception.
It seems that there is some kind of synaptic saturation happening there or something like that. Yeah, I have heard, and I have no reason to believe it, that I've never overdosed on mushrooms or felt that I've overdosed. I've taken some enormous unweighed batches, but I've never felt that I had overdosed. But people have described to me what goes on above 35 milligrams of chemical psilocybin. And basically what people say is the hallucinations condense and freeze.
Near the hot desert just outside of Phoenix, Arizona, is a company called Alcor. Despite the high temperature outside, within, over 100 human bodies are being preserved at very low temperatures. Host David Pogue met with the president and CEO, Max Moore, to learn about the field of cryonics.
So who's in this gallery here?
These are some of our patients. We call them patients because we don't regard them as dead people. Their idea is that what we call death today is something of an arbitrary line. Really, it's today's doctors giving up and saying, there's nothing more I can do for this person, and I'm letting them go. What we're doing is we're saying, let's not quit there. Let's give the future a chance to bring these patients back. So let me show you the patient care bay.
Patient care bay.
Yes, this is where we have currently 117 patients, the oldest being Professor James Bedford, whose career was back in 1967.
Wow! Oh my gosh, this is very sci-fi.
It's not quite as sci-fi as in the movies where they always have a little frosty face behind a glass plate. You can't really do that, but here in these larger viewers we have 4 whole body patients, and we can also fit 5 neuro patients in a central column.
There's people in those cans.
That's right.
It cools these chips to almost absolute zero. just a wisp, a fraction of a degree above absolute zero. Hundreds of times colder than interstellar space. Amongst the coldest and most isolated and extreme conditions that humans have ever been able to engineer.
What happened is I separated from my body, and I was like over here, and my body was here. But somebody came up to me who I only met once or twice and started making conversation with my body. And I, over here, watched but I, over here, was in possession of my mind. Calmly, thought, process, da-da-da. But I, with my mind over here, watched my body go through this whole rigmarole with this person and make social conversation. Hello, how are you? Why, certainly, all this stuff. And I watched myself, and I couldn't for the life of me figure out how, because I knew I had my brain over here. So the brain that was playing the game over here was like something else. But yet it was my facial muscles were smiling when it was appropriate to smile. My physical body did everything exactly as it was supposed to, but yet I wasn't participating one dot and didn't have any interest in participating. And I don't know, that was just so interesting to me because my mind was definitely not running that show, the physical show.
Google knows what you want to search before you finish typing. Facebook can tag you automatically in a photograph. Heck, cars can drive themselves now. That's not just computers getting better, that's artificial intelligence getting smarter. Geoffrey Hinton's 3 decades of work on deep machine learning helped make it happen, and he joins us now on where AI is today and where it's headed. He's a professor of computer science at the University of Toronto and a distinguished researcher at Google, and it's great to have you here at TVO.
It's great to be here.
How many years away do you think we are from a neural network being able to do anything that a brain can do?
I don't know. It's very hard to predict the future beyond 5 years. I don't think it'll happen in the next 5 years. Beyond that, it's all a kind of fog, so I'd be very cautious about making a prediction.
Is there anything about this that makes you nervous?
In the very long run, yes. I mean, obviously, having other super intelligent beings who are more intelligent than us is something to be nervous about. It's not going to happen for a long time, but it is something to be nervous about in the long run.
What aspect of it makes you nervous?
Well, will they be nice to us?
It's just like the movies. You're worried about that scenario in the movies.
In the very long term, yes.
Where they
I think over the next 5 or 10 years, we don't have to worry about it. Also, the movies always portray it as an individual intelligence. I think it may be that it goes in a different direction where we sort of develop jointly with these things. So the things aren't fully autonomous, they're developed to help us. They're like personal assistants. And we'll develop with them. And it'll be more of a symbiosis than a rivalry. But we don't know.
What is it?
It's real flesh and blood, though it seems to heal itself quickly. The heart is human and very powerful. The brain, too, but with a chip interface.
You done to me?
It has a hybrid nervous system. One human cortex, one machine.
What have they done? Who built you? My name is Marcus Wright. You think you're human? I am human.
Is Rick Deckard a replicant? When we first meet Harrison Ford's Deckard, the bounty hunter or Blade Runner at the center of Ridley Scott's 1982 film, he's tasked with killing android slaves called replicants.
I need the old Blade Runner. I need your magic.
Deckard is reluctant, but he mostly completes his assignment, though not before falling in love with a beautiful replicant called Rachel. Rachel is so human-like that it takes an unusually high number of questions on Deckard's test to discern her android nature.
It took more than 100 for Rachel, didn't it?
She doesn't know.
And significantly, she asks him,
You know that void comp test of yours? Did you ever take that test yourself?
I'm Sarah. I'm a 17-year-old from Sweden. I found my doppelganger on twinstrangers.com. Right now I'm on a flight to meet her in Dublin. So excited.
Hi, I'm Shannon and I'm about to meet my twin stranger, Sarah, from Sweden. So we found each other on Twin Strangers. I completely forgot about it and I got an email a few weeks ago and we're here now. So I can't wait to meet Sarah. I feel sick. I actually feel sick.
Hi! Oh my god!
Nice to meet you. Oh my god, you look so happy. I can't believe I met my twin stranger. And then we gave her a hug and then we just stood there like, oh my god, this is so weird. Between our noses, our eyes, we have the exact same ears, lips, expressions, pout, smile. It's just weird. So when I first met Sarah, I was just so shocked that I couldn't really take it in. And then as the day went on, we went into town and did our activities and like kind of had fun and started talking. I think that's when it hit me.
Like the more I saw her, the more and more I saw myself.
What's the first thing you do when you want to play almost any video game? You create a player to play the game for you. And Disney has very amazing technology, at least it's amazing to me, that lets you design your player in great detail, down to the shape of its nose. Your first choice, of course, is what gender you want your player to be, male or female. Then you can choose the shape of the body from 5 different appearances. And then the height, from short to tall. You can even choose the color of their skin, ranging all the way from pale white to red to brown. And then the width of the face, and the height of the forehead, and the roundness of the face. Now it's time for the jaw, the width, the length, the angle of the chin, the size of the chin, and then the width and thickness of the lips. And we finish working on the face with the cheeks, from fat to thin. You have your choice of eye color, the shape of the eyebrows, and even the spacing of the eyes. Next, it's the size, angle, and position of the ears, the length of the hair, and 8 different shades of hair color. And now that you've decided what you want your player to look like, down to the shape of its nose, you can give it a name.
Do you read Sutter Kane?
Do we perceive what is real, or do we make reality out of our perception? In the Mouth of Madness is a unique take on delusion and insanity. Perhaps it's just what you believe that's the difference between civility and derangement. And if you can bend people towards believing certain precepts, you can get them to do anything.
Hell, you can believe anything.
The weary gunfighter walked slowly through the saloon. The long miles from Cheyenne had taken their toll.
Who's saying that stuff?
Is this town big enough for 2 forms of weirdness that are apparently not the same? In other words, it took me a long time to get used to the idea that there could be one exception to the onrushing momentum of reality. The idea that Alpha Salvanorine is a second dispensation from reality raises the question, 3, 4, 50, 500, 10,000? Maybe reality is a far more perishable concept than we ever dared or feared to suppose.
And hallucinations are completely different. They don't seem to be of our creation. They don't seem to be under control. They seem to come from the outside and to mimic perception.
The hallucinations condense and freeze.
There's people in those cans.
We call them patients because we don't regard them as dead people.
What happened is I separated from my body, and I was like over here, and my body was here. My mind was definitely not running that show.
Google knows what you want to search before you finish typing. Facebook can tag you automatically in a photograph. Heck, cars can drive themselves now. That's not just computers getting better, that's artificial intelligence getting smarter.
And we'll develop with them. And it'll be more of a symbiosis than a rivalry.
What is it?
It's real flesh and blood.
I need the old Blade Runner.
Did you ever take that test yourself?
Like, the more I saw her, the more and more I saw myself.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality.
And that is that there are an enormous number, mind-bogglingly large number, of parallel realities, as real as this one.
Do we perceive what is real, or do we make reality out of our perception?
And to mimic perception.
Is this town big enough for two forms of weirdness?
What happened is I separated from my body, and my mind was definitely not running that show.
Before you finish typing. Heck, cars can drive themselves now, getting smarter.
And we'll develop with them. Symbiosis.
And the hallucinations are completely different. They don't seem to be around creation.
I need the old Blade Runner.
We are living in a
mind-boggling of parallel realities, as real as this one.
computer-programmed reality.
Is this town big enough for two forms of That's a controversial thing. A number of people do it. One of the hardest evenings I ever spent was that combination. And I will never do that again. But I haven't been able to line up too much support. The question is, what about combining Pagamen harmala with mushrooms, with Stropharia cubensis? Now, what happened to me was I took half a dose of mushrooms, which for me would be 2.5 grams. I took 2.5 grams of mushrooms with half a dose of ayahuasca. And it seemed crazy-making to me. Very, very, very unpleasant state. I think what was happening as I analyzed it later was that short-term memory absolutely would not transcript. And so I got into this strange loop which went like this. Something's wrong. What's wrong?
Oh, God.
Nothing's wrong. Okay. Something's wrong. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Okay. And it was serious, and it went on for about an hour, and I just did not know what to do. I had the image from 2001 of the guy outside the ship saying, "Open the pod doors, Hal." Saying, "I can't do that, Dave." "Open the pod doors, Hal." "I'm sorry, Dave." And it really seemed to me, I could almost see an enzymatic, I almost had like a nano-engineer's view of the problem. I could see at the synaptic level that the molecular machinery was lodged in some peculiar configuration, and I was broke into a sweat, and I just said, okay, I'm going to sit here till this goes away. I'm not going to start screaming. I'm not going to call for help. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to wait until this goes away. And then I started deep breathing as a strategy for metabolizing. And after 45 minutes or so, it kind of jiggled loose. And then it was like, oh, Huh. Oh, wow. What a bummer that was.
Now I know how Reagan feels all the time.
Yeah, that's what it's like. It's a nightmare.
Story in here I had the most trouble with is this one, a bitchin' bod. I got 2 pages into it and I thought, oh, this is too negative, it's too twisted, it's too upsetting, I gotta stop this. So I quit working on it and I threw the pages in the garbage can. And at some point Aileen came in my studio for something and I decided, well, I'll show her this and see what she thinks about it. So I pulled them out of the garbage can. I said, Aileen, this thing, what do you think about this? I threw it away. I decided I want to continue with it. It's just too weird. It's just too disturbing. She read it and said, you have to finish this. You just have to do it. Obviously, you got to see this through. I said, well, okay, she's a woman. She said, I have to do it, so I'll do it. So Flaky Food answers the door, and there's this girl's body staying there, but what you see is Mr. Natural's head and his beard over the front of her where her head should be. That's how it starts. Flaky Food, he's very confused by that. And Mr. Natural comes galloping in, riding the girl around the room, and her body's very frisky, and you don't see her head at all. You just see Mr. Natural's beard over where her head should be. So then she lands in a split, and Mr. Natural starts talking about what an amazing body this woman has, but the head was always a problem, because she had such an obnoxious personality. Flaky Food is shocked and horrified when he sees that she actually doesn't have a head. And Mr. Natural explains, well, let's face it, she was obnoxious, so I just got rid of the head. And then you always wanted her, you always lusted after her, and now you can have her because her head's missing. So then he starts explaining how took the head off and topped the neck with this little cap. And that Mr. Natural says he found out, he discovered that there was that she had a second smaller brain in her butt. And that's what's making the body function. And then he gives Food directions on how to feed her. You take this cap off and you put this funnel down her neck. And Mr. Natural pulls out this mannequin head and says, if you take her outside, you got to put this head on her so people aren't shocked and horrified by a headless girl walking around. And then Mr. Natural leaves and says, don't say I never did anything for you. He gives the girl to Food. And Food's kind of getting excited. He's got this frisky, wondrous girl body all to himself to do with whatever he wants. And he says, I like it better with just the cap. He knocks the fake head off. He's leading her over to the wall, and she accidentally steps on the fake head and smashes it. He pushes her against the wall, pulls her clothes off. He's admiring her firm and solid butt. This is the part where I get excited when I'm working on it. I really enjoy drawing the female form. I always make a lot of fuss and bother to make sure the figure comes out just the way I want it. The male side, I don't care what they look like that much. So he starts to fuck her. Here he penetrates her from behind, and he's getting really excited. And at the same time, he feels somewhat guilty. And then while he's in the middle of coming, he imagines her severed head and then her face condemning him. She says, you little shit. Cut to Mr. Natural. He's home. Phone's ringing. He's saying, well, got home about an hour ago. Yep, it's phoned. Yep, he's feeling guilty. Food wants to bring her back over. He wants to get rid of her. He can't handle it. So Mr. Natural says, okay, bring her over. He says, make sure you put the head back on before you take her outside. So he goes to get the head and he realizes it's been smashed. He doesn't know what to do.
Has anyone ever made you question your reality?
Culturally conditioned to suppress our anger.
So he ties up a t-shirt into a ball and puts it on top of the cap, and then he puts the hat on. He pushes her in the car. And we cut to Mr. Natural's house. Mr. Natural's saying he's going to regret it if he doesn't keep her. But Mr. Natural says, all right, forget it. We'll put the head back. Mr. Natural unscrews the clamp, pulls this pipe out of her. Then he reaches in there. This is probably the most sickening, disturbing panel in the whole story. So he's pulling real hard, and he pulls her head back out by her tongue. Her head was actually inside her body all the time. Again, Funt is very shocked, but then he's relieved that her head is back. Mr. Natural says, yeah, an old African witch doctor stuff, nothing special. And she just says, that was so weird. Mr. Natural says, yep. And they both realize, yep, the head's back, the trouble's back. She says, what happened to her, and what did Mr. Natural do to her, and where does he get his crazy ideas? At this point, Funty feels so guilty, he starts apologizing to the devil girl for having, done the deed to her when she didn't have her head. And she says, what are you saying? And she suddenly realizes that Mr. Natural had handed her over to Funt for him to play with. And she says, you gave me to that schmuck to play with as if I was a piece of meat. He says, oh, what the hell's the difference? So he tries to get away, and she's chasing him. And in the end, she's raging with anger. And she says, where's a butcher knife? I'm going to cut both your heads off.
Anger is very dangerous. Makes people do stupid things.
Of all the emotions, anger stands out as one of the most powerful and certainly the most destructive. Rage, resentment, chronic hostility, and hatred are all forms of anger which, if allowed to persist, can result in intense personal suffering, harm to those close to us, and even death on a mass scale. In the 20th century, hundreds of millions of people died at the hands of political movements which fed off the resentment of the masses, a fact that should wake us up to the peril of ignoring our anger. Yet not all anger is pathological and destructive. Sometimes anger is a warranted response to mistreatment, and even rage can be to our benefit if our life is in peril. Those who do not show anger at things that ought to arouse anger are regarded as fools, wrote Aristotle. Anger can also provide us with the energy and self-assertiveness required to transform ourselves, attain our goals, and engage in constructive activity. Anger is a sign that something within us wants to live and affirm itself, while its antithesis, apathy, signifies that a will to death has overcome us.
And soon, nobody will really remember that life existed on the planet.
Yet despite anger being a natural and sometimes healthy response to feelings of powerlessness, most of us have been culturally conditioned to suppress our anger. We have devised intricate social rituals to maintain a common altruistic self-image behind which we hide the anger and resentment which dwells within. And in so doing, we have made ourselves psychologically unstable.
They exist in a state of schizophrenia.
You seem unable to marshal an appropriate emotional response.
When you know the intention behind an action, a different system in your brain is activated. We now know that that system involves the mirror neurons and other areas of the brain, so that what you do is you follow a sequence of action, and when you can predict that sequence, you can determine what the implication of that sequence is. So when I have a bottle in my hand, you know I will continue to drink like this, not toss it at you, for example. That ability to understand the sensory implications, that is what you're going to see, of the motor actions that you're perceiving, allows you to create a map in the mind, if you will, that's correlated with neural firing patterns in this mirror neurons superior temporal area complex that creates a neural representation, a neural map of my intention in your head. In other words, beyond just seeing behavior, we see the intention beneath the behavior from the very beginning. Now, that's how we create the human capacity to imitate behavior.
They exist in a state of schizophrenia where they are both guards and prisoners, and as a result, they no longer have, having been lobotomized, the capacity to leave the prison they've made or to even see it as a prison.
Culture is not your friend.
That the majority of people would actually go right to the very highest level if there was some pressure from a man in a white coat who said things like,
"It's absolutely essential that you continue."
Let's talk about the machine mind. The machine mind. One of the main differences, perhaps the only difference between a warrior, a well-honed, trained warrior, and the average man, is that the warrior can function, can bring to bear upon his existence other resources than the paltry, disjointed resource that we know we exist in, that could be called the machine mind. The machine mind forces us to think in terms of black and white, zeros and ones. It forces us to think in terms of right and wrong, yes and no, and nothing in the middle makes any sense. And the machine mind can only work in a straight line, in a linear fashion, so that you must needs be told things in steps. It's the only way you're going to learn. One step, second step, third step, fourth step. When you step out into nature, everything must be absorbed in terms of the words that are labeled. Because if there are no words, the machine mind gets lost. It feels totally forlorn and lost without its inventory of words. That's how computers work. That's how you can work a website, or you can do a spreadsheet, because those words are broken down into zeros and ones, and then the machine mind can process that. They use AI to govern this realm. That AI then does its utmost best, because it is an AI. All it can impart to you through the foreign installation is its machine mind. It cannot impart to you anything else. Now here's where it gets interesting. Did you know that you have, apart from the zeros and ones dimension of yourself, which you don't even know that is what's going on, because it is very easy to step out of that and compare. It's not the problem, but it takes someone who has already stepped out to be able to pull you out of that. My apprentice yesterday had a very, very visceral experience of that pull, when every time they had to operate their mind outside of the confines, the demands and subscriptions of the machine mind, they would literally stop. Their mind would go blank, could not think, could not process. There's nothing there to process, because it's been taken out of its machine mind box, zeros and ones, and it's being asked to operate now in a different context. And it literally, like a switch been thrown off, turned off, like a toy soldier, turned off. And I told my apprentice, become a master of noticing this in yourself. That's the only way you will know that you are not in the grip of the machine mind. You are the machine mind. That's all that is available right now to you as an infinite being. What I'm getting at is there are other ways. The way a warrior navigates this realm is by a very well developed body sense. You sense your way through the world
to detect a certain kind of danger.
And the warrior learns to awaken that body sense. In most of you do not have a visceral idea of what a body sense, what that actually means, to navigate your life by sensing. That is the real radar to steer by in your life. And it will, once developed, once fully honed, you will have no need for your machine mind after that. You will see it for what it truly is, and you'll just have no need for it.
Essentially what's happening is when one person is playing the video game, they're not using their hands. They're simply looking at targets. What's going on in the other room is a transcranial magnetic stimulation device that creates a magnetic field that excites neurons. And it's the other man's hand that begins to move and hits the targets. So you've co-opted the portion of a body of another human, and then their hand can behave in the way that you want it to do. His goal, you'll see later if you download the video, is he would like to have a cap that you could put on and have a surgeon direct your hands to do battlefield surgery or something somewhere else in the world where they don't have a doctor who has the technical skills. You can put on the cap and your hands become an extension of that expert's body. The fine motor skill manipulation at that point in time was not great, but the person on the receiving end described the sensation as rather odd.
Mr. Natural comes galloping in, riding the girl around the room, and her body's very frisky, and you don't see her head at all. You just see Mr. Natural's beard over where her head should be. So then she lands in a split, and Mr. Natural starts talking about what an amazing body this woman has, but the head was always a problem because she had such an obnoxious personality.
He said, I didn't know anything until I saw my hand beginning to move and felt that it was something other. And its hand was moving. The hand could punch in a code. The hand could do a number of things. But the really fun part was that you're taking over somebody else's physical body with the mind of another human. So what do you think would be the next step? You follow medical research. You say, you can make a robot move. You can make a human hand move. What would you do next?
It's fun to think about these things.
To say, wow, they're getting brains connected to run things. You have to begin to think either like doctors or like security and intelligence people. Can you actually send and receive sensory information like the Matrix? I'll show you a little bit of this experiment. The short answer is yes.
Ты, товарищ мой, не попомнила в стороне глухой, схорони меня.
Судя по твоим напорюгам, видно, что ты сидел в Сибири. И что ты был вором.
Отец мой на дядю батрачил. Начальство в машине чинил. Мне 15 было, когда я начал запчасти продавать.
Тебя насильно накалывали?
Ни разу.
А с кумом ты воевал?
В карцере гнил не раз.
Ты в питерских крестах сидел?
Дюжина ходов в СИЗО. Меня звали Пень за упрямство.
Отец твой был сукой, фраер, что на власти въехал. Так?
Точно. Отец мне никто. А мать...
Нет у тебя матери. Один хером лет была.
Да.
Now listen, no negotiating on this one. She's still a virgin.
Aiden. You have come for me. What is wrong? You have come to take me. Have you not? Wait. Please. 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 No. No. Wait. 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 Look at me. No.
Can function and can bring to bear upon his existence.
Has brought you to a point which we might call don't care.
It is over. There is nothing left to do.
Are you sure? Perhaps he simply didn't care for the girl.
Are you listening to me? His master's daughter was presented to him as a whore, and he did nothing. He cares for nothing. Not honor, not his family, not himself, and certainly not you.
You may assume that these are two separate things.
At last, I'm free of this. Well done. Well done.
You just have arrived at the insight that your decision, your will, doesn't have any part in the thing at all. And that's what you needed to know. You've overcome, you see, the illusion of having a separate ego.
It's actually a totalitarian process that's been used down through history. I mean, that's what totalitarian dictators, states, that's what they want to do. They want to know everything about the population so they can control it.
We have planned. We have sacrificed. We have waited for the right moment. And now, it is time.